He was the master of pain, a man whose hands built the racks, whose mind designed the traps, whose cruelty filled every stone of the dungeon below the castle. Prisoners screamed because he wanted them to. They bled where he told them to. He controlled the agony of others, like a composer conducting an orchestra. But one night he walked into the dungeon alone. Guards heard the heavy door close. Hours passed. No one saw him return. When they went to look, the corridors were empty. His tools were still there. The torches still burned, but the torturer himself was gone. Some swore they heard footsteps echoing for days after, though no figure appeared. Others claimed the screams never stopped, that the dungeon itself had taken its master. The man who built the traps had vanished inside them. And the question that haunted every guard who stood above those stone steps was simple. If he never came out, what was waiting in the dark that even he could not survive? His name was whispered more than spoken. He had no titles of nobility, no place among kings or priests. He was known only for what he created. The dungeon was his masterpiece and he its living heart. He began as a soldier, brutal in war, ruthless with prisoners. Where others swung swords, he studied screams. He discovered that pain was not chaos but craft, a science, and soon lords and rulers summoned him not for his loyalty, but for his knowledge. They gave him stone walls, iron tools, and human flesh. With those, he built his legacy. The dungeon grew room by room, corridor by corridor. At first it was simple, chains, whips, pits, but his imagination sharpened. He devised iron chairs that grew hotter with each breath, cages so small that men broke their own bones trying to stand, dripping water that drove prisoners mad in silence. Each device was designed not only to wound, but to break the mind, and he loved it. Witnesses said he walked the halls like a priest in a temple, blessing every stone with agony. He tested every trap himself, not on his own body, but on the condemned. Each scream was a measurement, each death was a lesson. He recorded them in journals, diagrams scrawled with blood and ink. Fear of him spread beyond the prison walls. Villagers whispered of his presence even if they had never seen him. Mothers threatened their children with his name. Soldiers who once fought beside him now looked away when he passed. Even lords, who relied on his work, refused to meet his eyes. Because he was not simply a man who tortured. He was a man who believed suffering revealed truth. He called it the language of the bones. And in his dungeon, every prisoner spoke it before the end. But the dungeon became more than his workshop. It became his shadow. The corridors grew so vast that even guards lost their way. The air was heavy with the memory of screams. Some swore they felt watched, even in empty rooms. Torches sputtered out without reason. Shackles rattled when no hand touched them. Guards began refusing night duty. Some resigned entirely. They claimed the dungeon had absorbed too much blood, too much terror, too much of its master's mind. They said it was no longer just stone, it was alive. The torturer dismissed their fears. He said walls were walls, iron was iron, and the only ghosts were those men invented in their weakness. But still he added more traps, more secret passages, more chambers with doors that locked from only one side. He said it was to secure the prisoners, but some whispered it was to secure himself. And then came the first disappearance. A guard was sent down with food. He never returned. At first, the others thought he had fled, but his sword was found lying in the corridor, his lantern extinguished. His footsteps ended in the dust, mid-stride. There was no body, no blood, no sign of struggle. The torturer dismissed it too. He said the man was a coward, that fear itself had swallowed him. But those who worked beneath him began to wonder. If the dungeon could devour prisoners and guards alike, what else could it take? Still, the torturer remained confident. He continued his work, deeper and darker. He said his greatest design was nearly finished. A labyrinth of traps so perfect that no prisoner could escape. A place, he said, that will keep screaming even when empty. And then the night came when he walked into the dungeon himself. Alone, no guards, no prisoners. Only the master and his masterpiece. He closed the door behind him, and he was never seen again. When the torturer did not return, the guards waited. An hour passed, then 2, then 6. By morning, whispers spread through the castle. He had vanished. The commander of the guard ordered a search. Torches were lit. Doors creaked open. Dozens of men descended into the dungeon, armed with swords and shields, though no prisoner remained to threaten them. Their footsteps echoed as they marched deeper, calling the torturer's name. They expected to find him hunched over his journals, lost in his obsessions, or perhaps testing one of his devices, too consumed by his work to notice the passing hours. What they found was silence. The racks stood ready, the cages hung open, the floor was slick with water dripping from the stones, but the master of it all was gone. His table lay bare, no notes, no ink, no bread or wine. Even his tools were neatly arranged, untouched, as though waiting for hands that would never return. The guards split into groups, combing the corridors. Some swore they heard faint cries, shouts for help, desperate, distant. They ran toward the sound, but it always faded into nothing, swallowed by the twisting stone. One group followed the sound of chains rattling, only to find empty walls. Another heard footsteps ahead, but when they reached the corridor, dust lay undisturbed. Hours turned into days. No sign of him was ever found. Not a drop of blood, not a scrap of cloth, no body, no trail. He had entered a place designed to trap others, and it had trapped him perfectly. Fear spread quickly. Some guards refused to return to the dungeon. Others muttered that he had fallen into his own devices, ensnared by a trap he forgot to mark. A few swore something worse, that the dungeon itself had claimed him, just as it had claimed the missing guard before. The commander sealed sections of the dungeon, nailing doors shut, abandoning corridors. But strange sounds still drifted upward. At night, screams echoed through the stone, though no prisoners remained below. Some claimed to hear the torturer's voice, begging to be released. Others said they heard laughter, his laughter, low and rasping, as though mocking them from beyond. Rumors spread to the villages. Travelers told of the torture devoured by his own labyrinth. They spoke of walls that moved, traps that reset themselves, doors that locked without hands. They said the dungeon was cursed, that its creator had been taken by the very pain he worshipped. And yet, not all believed he was dead. Some whispered he had never left at all, that he still walked those halls, unseen, watching intruders, guiding them into traps. A few guards swore they felt eyes on them when they entered, as though the dungeon itself was alive and aware. One legend grew darker still. It claimed the torturer had discovered a way to bind himself to the dungeon, that he had carved his body into its walls, his bones into its mortar, his veins into its pipes, that every scream the walls echoed was his voice, every drop of water his blood. He had not vanished. He had become the dungeon itself. The king ordered the dungeon locked. The heavy doors were barred, keys sealed away. No man enters, he declared, and no man leaves. But doors cannot silence stone. The screams continued, faint but unmistakable. Guards abandoned their posts. Travelers avoided the castle. Priests were summoned to bless the halls, but their prayers were swallowed by echoes, their holy water dripping into darkness without effect. And so the dungeon remained, sealed yet restless. The man who had once mastered pain had disappeared inside it, and the world above was left to wonder, had he fallen into a trap of his own design? Or had his dungeon decided that after years of feeding it with suffering, it was finally his turn? The dungeon was sealed, but silence never came. At night, guards posted above the stone steps heard sounds no one could explain. Chains scraping, doors slamming, screams echoing through the corridors. Some swore they heard the torturer's voice calling from below, begging for release. Others swore it wasn't begging, it was laughter. The king ordered priests to cleanse the place. Holy water was poured into the cracks. Incense burned until the walls blackened. The priests recited prayers until their throats gave out, yet the sounds grew louder. One priest collapsed mid-ritual, clutching his chest, screaming that something had seized him from the inside. He died before dawn. His body was carried out, but his scream lingered, echoing in the halls long after. The king declared the dungeon cursed and ordered it abandoned. But abandoning a wound does not heal it. Years passed, and the stories multiplied. Travelers who camped near the castle ruins claimed to see torches flicker underground. Some said they saw figures moving behind sealed doors, shadows dragging chains, eyes burning in the dark. Shepherds who strayed too close with their flocks found animals missing, their bones later discovered at the dungeon's threshold. Braver men tried to enter. None returned. A group of thieves, convinced treasures were hidden within, pried open one of the sealed doors. They descended into the dark with lanterns. Hours passed. By morning, the villagers found the lanterns extinguished in the courtyard, but no thieves. Their voices were heard that night, screaming from below, as if their bodies had been left behind but their souls trapped in stone. The dungeon had become something more than a prison. It was no longer a place for suffering. It was suffering itself, and the torturer was at its core. Legends twisted around his name. Some said he was still alive, pacing the endless corridors, kept alive by the very agony he had inflicted on others. Others swore he had been torn apart by his own devices, his body scattered, each trap holding a piece of him, the rack his spine, the cages his ribs, the dripping pipes his veins. When the dungeon groaned, they said, it was his voice carried through the stone. Fear spread so deep that even kings abandoned the castle. The land fell into ruin, its fields empty, its halls hollow. No one dared rebuild it, for who could build atop such screams? Children were warned, stray too far, and the dungeon will take you, just as it took its master. But the dungeon did not rest with silence. It hunted memory. Those who dared speak of the torturer often claimed strange things began to happen. One man said he dreamed of iron doors slamming, waking with bruises on his arms. A woman swore she heard chains dragging through her home, though no one else lived there. Some said the torturer's journals, thought destroyed, appeared in places they should not be. Ink fresh, pages wet with something that was not water. The more people tried to forget, the more the story spread. Generations passed, yet the tale endured. The torturer who vanished into his own dungeon. The man who built traps so perfect, they claimed him as their final victim. The man who believed he controlled pain until pain consumed him. But here lies the darker thought. Was his disappearance an accident or his design? Some scholars argued he had meant to vanish, that he had built the dungeon not as a prison for others, but as a passage for himself. That in walking through those corridors alone, he sought not to escape, but to become eternal. And in the screams that echoed centuries later, perhaps he succeeded. Because when a place continues to breathe long after its master is gone, one must ask, is the master truly gone? And if he is not, what waits in the dark for the next soul bold or foolish enough to enter? The rulers who followed could not tolerate the shadow of the dungeon. It was a wound on their land, a scar too deep to heal. They tried to bury it. They tried to erase it. And each attempt only deepened the curse. One king ordered the dungeon collapsed. Workers filled its halls with stones, sealing door after door, until the air above vibrated with the pounding of hammers. For weeks, the sound of construction drowned out the whispers. But when the work was finished, the whispers returned, louder, angrier. Guards swore they heard the sound of fists pounding from beneath the stone, as if hundreds of prisoners were buried alive, still begging to be freed. Another ruler tried fire. Pitch was poured into every crack, torches dropped into every hole. The dungeon burned for days, smoke blackening the sky. But when the flames died, the screams began again. The fire had not cleansed, it had awakened. Those who lit the torches reported nightmares, their skin blistering in sleep as though they still stood before the blaze. The final attempt was betrayal itself. A council of nobles, desperate to rid the land of the curse, betrayed their own soldiers. They sent them into the dungeon with orders to collapse it from within. None returned. Their families later swore they heard their voices at night, calling from the earth, crying that they had been tricked. Fear spread through the kingdom. The land around the dungeon was abandoned. Fields withered, homes rotted, roads crumbled. The castle above became a ruin, its stones stripped for other fortresses. But the dungeon remained. It refused to die, and the story of the torturer, its master who vanished, refused to fade. Some believed he was trapped, endlessly wandering his own corridors. Others believed he had chosen to dissolve into them, to make his flesh and spirit part of the walls themselves. Still others whispered he had never disappeared at all, that he walked the world above, unseen, while his dungeon screamed below, waiting for his return. But the most terrifying belief was also the simplest, that the dungeon was no longer just a place. It had become him. And every scream that echoed through its corridors was not of the prisoners he once broke, but of the torturer himself repeating his own disappearance over and over. Those who heard it said it was not merely sound, it was invitation. Time did not soften the legend. Centuries passed, but the dungeon's name was still whispered as a curse. The castle above crumbled into ruin, ivy crawling over broken stone, yet no one dared dig too deep. Farmers avoided the land, pilgrims circled wide around it, and still, at night, screams rose from beneath the earth. Eventually, curiosity overcame fear. Scholars arrived, carrying books and lanterns, determined to prove the stories false. They claimed that there were no curses, only myths. They pried open the sealed doors, descended into the dark, and recorded every step. For days, nothing happened. They wrote confidently of empty halls, of silence, of superstition destroyed. Then their writing stopped. The last page of their journal described a faint sound. Chains, one of them wrote, dragging closer. No further words followed. Their lanterns were later found at the entrance, extinguished, but no bodies ever returned. Decades later, treasure seekers tried the same. They entered with torches and ropes, eager for gold rumored to be hidden in the depths. Villagers saw the firelight vanish below. By morning, the ropes were cut clean, as if by unseen hands. Not one of them emerged, but the most chilling tale came from a lone survivor. A soldier, part of a group sent to map the ruins, stumbled back into the village days after his unit vanished. His eyes were wide, his voice cracked, his body trembling. He refused to enter homes, refused to sit, refused to close his eyes. He said the torturer was still inside, waiting. He swore he had seen him walking the halls, barefoot, chains dragging behind him, eyes like glass in the dark. The soldier died within a week, raving in his sleep. His last words, "He is still building." From then on, the dungeon was abandoned completely. No king ordered it destroyed. No priest dared bless it. No thief risked entering. It was left to rot, sealed by earth and stone, but never silent. Travelers still spoke of the screams, the rattling chains, the echoes of footsteps that never faded. And always at the center of the story was the torturer. Some swore he had become immortal, his soul fused to the dungeon. Others said the dungeon itself had grown hungry, and he was merely its first feast. But all agreed on one thing: he had walked into his own creation and never walked out. The master of suffering had been devoured by it, and those who listened closely knew the dungeon was not finished. It was waiting. The torturer designed the screams. He built the walls, the chains, the cages. He controlled every detail of suffering. And then one night, he walked into the dungeon alone and vanished. That was centuries ago, but the story never ended. The dungeon still stands, hidden beneath ruins, silent by day, alive by night. Travelers swear they hear footsteps echoing beneath the earth. Chains still rattle, screams still rise. And in the dark, some say they see a figure pacing, as though continuing his endless work. The question is no longer where the torturer went. The question is what he became. If pain was his craft, did it consume him? If the dungeon was his masterpiece, did he dissolve into it? Or is he still alive, bound not by flesh, but by the walls themselves, forever designing, forever building, forever waiting for the next victim to enter? Because a place that devours its master does not rest. It hungers, and every story told about it, every whisper of its name, feeds it. So listen carefully. If you ever pass by ruins where the ground hums faintly, where the air seems too heavy, where silence feels like a trap, do not go down. Do not follow the stairs. Do not test the dark, for the torturer's dungeon has no end. And if he could vanish into it without a trace, what chance would you have?